think, well, we all know how GST came in. It came with a bang. There were so many provisions which were required to be implemented right at the beginning when GST came in. But they couldn't happen. There were various technical glitches which we have faced and are facing till today also. But yes, 3 years down the line, or almost 3.5 years down the line, the government is still pursuing its objective of entirely making GST very, very techno savvy. The entire system, they want all processes to be done online, and all reports, etc., to be generated online. Even the mismatching of data, which was already envisaged but couldn't happen all along. Well, things have moved over a period of time, and much of these things which were anticipated, like the GSTR 2A and the GSTR 2B, has now become a reality, and e-invoicing has also become a reality, right? So all these things are happening now, and they are happening with a very fast pace. We will really need to catch up with the government. The government is in much advanced stage, making all these preparations and rolling it out and implementing it. Technical glitches, maybe they may still continue at some level, but this is how things are going to be post this pandemic, and in future also. So let's try to understand these two new concepts which have come regarding e-invoicing and QRMP. As mentioned by Atul Bhai, government is taking care of both the types of taxpayers. One who are big taxpayers, and e-invoicing has already been rolled out for them. For the small taxpayers, we have the QRMP scheme. Well, I'll first take over the QRMP scheme, and then we will go to the e-invoicing part of it. QRMP, as the name suggests, it's quarterly return monthly payment. Return quarterly file karna hai. Payment, of course, government will not lose its revenue, and it wants the payment on monthly basis only. There is no change in that. Even today also, whatever 3B are being filed, all payments are required to be made monthly. Reporting in GSTR1 is quarterly in some cases. And that is where the problem was lying, that if GSTR1 are filed quarterly, then how will the recipient get the credit of the taxes paid by the supplier? And to find out a way, or to bridge the gap between this monthly payment and quarterly return filing, this is where the main premise of this scheme lies. Well, as I already announced, the scheme is effective from 1st of January 2021. And this was decided in the 42nd meeting held on 5th of October by the GST Council. And various notifications got rolled out in the month of November. On 10 November, all these various notifications came. Basically, one notification, the first one, 81 by 20, the notification, it notifies the amendment carried out in subsection 1, 2, and 7 of section 39 of the CGST Act, White Finance number 2 Act of 2019. So these announcements were already made and implemented in the Act in 2019, by the Finance Act 2019. But the effective date was not yet notified. And by this notification, the amendments were made in section 39 to identify the people, the taxpayers who will be covered by this QRMP scheme. Of course, then there were amendments to the rules. The classes of persons to whom it is applicable were notified, and the procedures for how this scheme will actually work, they all came. All these notifications came on the same date. We will go through each of these. I'll take on the next scheme. So as mentioned, who are eligible for the QRMP scheme? It is eligible only for registered persons having aggregate turnover up to rupees 5 crore in the preceding financial year. So if the turnover in the previous financial year is more than 5 crore rupees, then they are eligible for the QRMP scheme. And how this turnover shall be calculated? Government itself is calculating this as the aggregate turnover. We all are aware about section 2 subsection 6 of the CGST Act, where aggregate turnover has been mentioned. So this aggregate turnover will be taking into consideration all the turnovers on pan-India basis of a person. So if the aggregate annual turnover for the preceding financial year shall be calculated on the common portal, taking into account details furnished by the taxpayer in 3B for the tax periods in the preceding financial year. Now, this will be applicable in cases where all the 3B are filed, because the data which the department is having is what is reported in 3B, and they will be taking 3B as the base. In case if books of accounts are having, say, a different turnover than 3B, the taxpayer will have to notify to the government through the portal that whether he is eligible or not eligible for the QRMP scheme. So that is one area where issue could arise, because the system generated turnover will be as per the 3B. So this we need to keep into mind. And based on the previous financial year. In case if the aggregate turnover exceeds 5 crore during any quarter in the current financial year, the registered person shall not be eligible for the scheme from the next quarter. So things are very clear. Your turnover has to remain below 5 crore. If in the previous year the turnover was below 5 crore, you are eligible in current year. In current year, say you have opted for the scheme, you are filing quarterly returns, but say in the month of January the turnover exceeds 5 crore, then from the next quarter you will be again out of the scheme of QRMP and be eligible for the normal regular return filing. So how to exercise the option under this scheme? The facility to avail the scheme would be available throughout the year on the common portal. So it will be available at all times of the year. But when to actually exercise the option? The registered person can opt in for any quarter. So there will be an opt-in tab available. You will have to opt in for any quarter, and there will be a period within which that opting in can happen. It can happen from the first day of second month of the preceding quarter to the last day of the first month of the quarter. We'll take that with an example. Say Mr. X is a person who wants to avail QRMP scheme for the period July to September. So for them, first day of the previous 2 months, right? First day of the second month of previous quarter. So for July to September, the previous quarter is April to June, and first day of the second month means 1st of May till 31st day of the subsequent month of the quarter, first month of the quarter. So that will be up to 31st July. So basically a 3-month window is given. Say for any quarter a person wants to opt in, पिछले quarter के 2 महीने and current quarter का first month. That is the time frame. That is a 3 months time frame within which the option can be exercised. The condition which is mentioned is that if a person is exercising the option, say on 27 July for the quarter July to September, that is in the first month in that month itself, then he must have furnished the return for the month of June, which was due on 22nd July. So basically, till the previous tax period, whichever returns were required to be filed, they should have been filed. Then only the person will be able to obtain it from the subsequent quarter in which he wants to obtain within this dates which are provided. So the previous return, basically, it just tries to bring the discipline that your previous return should have been filed on the date when you are going to exercise this option. And of course, this option is only once. That need not be exercised every quarter. Once exercised, it will continue till it is actually opted out by the registered person. Yeah, this is the chart for each of the quarters. So for April, May, and June, the opt-in can happen between 1st Feb to 30th April. For July to September, between 1st May to 31st July, and so on for all the other quarters. Now we need to understand what is going to happen in the transition phase to this new QRMP scheme. What is the government going to do? For the first quarter, that is January 2021 to March 2021, because this QRMP scheme is getting implemented from 1st of January 2021. For the first quarter, in order to facilitate the taxpayers, default migration is being enabled. So government will calculate by themselves, all the registered person whose aggregate turnover in 1920 is up to 5 crores and who have furnished GSTR 3B for the month of October by 30th November 2020, they will be migrated by default into the new scheme. Right. So it is not that everybody will have to opt in for the scheme. Those who don't want to continue with the scheme will have to opt out of the scheme. That is what will happen in case if a person does not want to fall into this new QRMP scheme, he will have to opt out. This is for all persons with turnover up to 5 crores. So this is what transition the government is going to do. There are three parts to it. For all registered persons having turnover up to 1.5 crores who have furnished GSTR1 on quarterly basis in the current financial year, the default option will remain as quarterly only because these persons are already filing their GSTR1 on quarterly basis. Their default option continues as quarterly. Then between 1.5 crores to 5 crores, there are two categories of taxpayers. One category of taxpayer is who are filing their GSTR1 on monthly basis, and the other category is where they are filing GSTR1 on quarterly basis for dealers between turnover of 1.5 crores to 5 crores. Right. So if they have already opted or are continuing to file the return on monthly basis, this tax bracket, or rather this bracket in which the turnover is 1.5 crores to 5 crores, this tax bracket, if they are under monthly, the default option will be monthly. And if they want to opt in for the quarterly, they will have to make a request on the portal to switch them over to the quarterly option. And of course, the other category between 1.5 to 5 crores, those who are filing quarterly, they will be migrated into quarterly option. So, and in case anybody wants to change any of these dealers, say even if he is below 1.5 crore turnover, or rather say he is in the monthly and he does not want to get migrated to quarterly, if he wants to continue with that system, all of them will have the option, and this option needs to be exercised from 5th of December 2020 to 31st of January 2021. So this is the time frame. A lesser time is available as compared to the other time limits because this is the transition phase, and this scheme was rolled out on 5th of December, and that is why this date has been given. Rather, it was announced in the month of October also, or rather in the month of November, that returns which are filed till 30th of November, that will be considered for the migration purposes and for the default option purposes. Right. So in case if a person wants to change the option, that option is available. Of course, within that, if say the migration has happened, but say in the month of September itself, the turnover has exceeded 5 crore rupees, and in spite of the migration, the person will have to, without fail, opt out of the scheme. And as I said, the opting out of the scheme also the opting out of the scheme will be available from first day of the second month. The opting out of the scheme will be available from first day of the second month of preceding quarter to the last day of the first month of the quarter. That is similar to the period which was there for opting in, say from 1st May to 31st of July. This is the opt-out period again for the period July to September. Like similarly, it was for the opt-in period. Similar is the case for the opt-out period. The time remains the same. The time period remains the same. Okay. Apart from transition, there are cases, or there are going to be cases where there are going to be new registrations during the year. So what will happen in the case of dealers who are taking a new registration during the year? So all persons who have obtained registration during any quarter of the or the registered persons opting out from paying tax under Section 10 of the CGST Act. Section 10 is the composition scheme dealers. During any quarter, shall be able to opt for the scheme for the quarter for which the opting facility is available on the date of exercising the option. So there are certain parameters within which new registration dealers and composition dealers who are opting out of composition, they will be able to opt in into the new scheme. Now, when we go to the opt-in facility on the GST portal, that facility has already commenced. So when we go to the dashboard, in the returns tab, there is an opt-in for quarterly return. This is available. Go to the previous screen. Yeah. So this opt-in is available in such cases. So if the aggregate turnover during 1920 is more than 5 crore, then this screen will appear. It says the turnover is more than 5 crore. So you'll be required to file a GSTR1 and GSTR3B on the regular basis. GSTR1 on monthly basis on 11th of each month and 3B on 20th of each month, or maybe the 22, whichever the date is applicable, that date will apply. And if the turnover is below 5 crore, when you go to the portal in the opt-in tab, there you will get it that the annual aggregate turnover for financial year 1920 is between 1.5 crore to 5 crores here. Then you will have the option of either seeking monthly or quarterly. In case if the monthly column is selected, then of course the due dates as were normally applicable, that is GSTR1 and 3B, 11th of subsequent month for GSTR1, and GSTR3B it is 22nd. Yeah, because below 5 crore, these dates have already set in the list A states. For 3B, the due dates are 22nd of the subsequent month for the month for which return is getting filed. And for list B states, it is 24th. And for above 5 crores, the date remains as 20. Hence, in the previous slide, when we saw 3B, the date was 20th. In this slide, because here it is of a dealer where the turnover is between 1.5 crore to 5 crore, and he is opting again for the monthly option. But being below 5 crore, the 3B date continues as 22nd of each month. And if he opts for the QRMP scheme, then this screen appears where for GSTR1, the date becomes 13th April 2021 for the third month. And for GSTR3B, say he is in Maharashtra, the due date becomes 22nd of April 2021. Right. So quarterly return for a person who is opting the QRMP scheme, for them, there will be no GST, GSTR1 and 3B for month 1 and 2. It will be directly a GSTR1 on quarterly basis, GSTR3B on monthly basis. But please wait, there are other conditions which will follow. Aisa nahi hai. Otherwise, what would be the point in keeping this entire scheme, right? So there are other conditions which are applicable. Before going to that other conditions, is QRMP applicable at PAN level or GSTN level? Now, although the eligibility criteria is based on aggregate turnover on PAN basis, the option to avail the scheme is GSTN wise. And I think this is the marked difference from what we are having under the for GSTR audit, GSTR 9C. I think there lots of discussion and debate we have been having that once the aggregate turnover exceeds 5 crores in one state, and in other state, even if it is below 5 crore, the view has been taken that audit will be applicable to that GSTN also. But here in this case, say there's a branch, ABCN company has multiple branches on pan-India basis in Maharashtra, Gujarat and Rajasthan, and multiple GSTNs on the same PAN, wherein they may select for Maharashtra and Gujarat for QRMP and file monthly returns for, say, Rajasthan. So that is possible under QRMP scheme. This is a marked difference as compared to the GST audit. This was not there available in the earlier one. Okay. So we are telling that there will be a quarterly return. So the main question which comes up, what happens to the data where B2B supplies have happened and the recipient wants to claim input tax credit. Okay, so now the government has, instead of GSTR1, has come out with a new simplified form, which is the Invoice Furnishing Facility, IFF. Now, this invoice furnishing facility will be available to the persons who have opted for QRMP scheme. It is a facility. It is not mandatory. Again, it's an option. So in case if the person who has opted for QRMP scheme feels that he has customers and his customers want to avail the credit on monthly basis, then such person can fill up this IFF, and the details of outward supplies, B2B transactions, can be furnished between the first day of the succeeding month till the 13th day of the succeeding month. Say for the month of January, it can be furnished up to 13th of February, right? But again, there's a cap over here. The details of outward supply shall, however, not exceed the value of rupees 50 lakh in each month. So government has thought that it is a small dealer, turnover during the year is less than 5 crores. So 50 lakhs per month, if they keep a limit, it is still, it will be 6 crores in a year. So let's keep the limit of 50 lakh. Maybe this limit was not required per se, because there could be small dealers who could be having seasonal businesses. And there this limit of 50 lakhs can hit them. But this 50 lakhs is in each month. So in such cases where it exceeds 50 lakh, there the person may decide not to opt in for the IFF or the QRMP scheme itself. He may not opt for the QRMP scheme in such cases. So this invoice uploading would be allowed from first day of the subsequent month till 13th of the succeeding month. That is, say for the month of January, invoices can be uploaded on the portal right from the first day each day till 13th day, and thereafter it will have to get filed on the system. And again, the circular clearly mentions that the facility is for to ensure that the invoices are duly reflected in GSTR 2A and 2B of the concerned recipient. I think that is what the entire demand was of the industry, the bigger companies as well as the smaller companies. Credit ka kya, where how will we get the credit? The small taxpayers on one hand wanted a regime where there is lesser compliance, option is available to them, that we can pay lump sum tax now and file a quarterly return. But the recipient always wanted the credit. And of course, we also have this rule 36(4) and various other provisions. So that was always a concern and a challenge between the taxpayers who were on monthly and the taxpayer who were the suppliers, the recipient and the supplier, where the supplier was below 5 crore. And this option has now been made available. I think that is one of the crux of this scheme, that it's an option available. The person may furnish IFF if applicable. He may not furnish. Say if they are small dealers like a Kirana dealer or a retail store wherein maximum sales are B2C sales, but yes, the turnover is up to 5 crore rupees. Then yes, this facility is will be much applicable to him. And in case if he still feels that he wants to opt in for scheme for B2B supplies, there is an option available. Yeah, and one more option के अंदर और एक option. Say there are 10 invoices which are issued by a person during the month, during the first month of the quarter, and he wants to furnish, the supplier wants to furnish only 4 invoices out of that, because the recipient in those cases is desiring to avail the credit in that particular month itself. Then yes, one more option is available. Say out of 10 invoices issued in a month, if only 4 invoices are the supplier wants to upload, he will be upload. He may upload only 4 invoices out of that, and the balance 6 invoices can be furnished while filing form GSTR1 at the end of the quarter, right? So that option is also available. So again, how will that get reflected in the GSTR 2B of the recipient? Of course, the 4 invoices furnished earlier on monthly basis will get reflected in 2B of the concerned recipient of the first month itself, and remaining 6 will get reflected in to be in the last month of the quarter, as and when they are uploaded. Yeah, and this IFF facility again will be available only from 1st of the month till the 13th of the subsequent month. For example, for the month of January, if a return is IFF facility is to be availed, then the details thereof need to be uploaded on the portal between 1st of February to 13th February only. Basically, because that is a cutoff date for their uh, maybe extracting the data for 2B purposes, and that is why this cutoff date has been put over here. That restriction has been put within all these available options. So a late invoice furnishing facility or late IFF, the dealer will not be able to file. If he wants to file it, he has to file it within that time frame only. As I told earlier, IFF is not mandatory, is an optional facility made available to the registered person under the QRMP scheme. And the details furnished in IFF are not required to be furnished in GSTR 1. Okay, now let's come to the payment part of it. We saw the outward supply and how to reflect the outward supply. Now let's come to the payment. Payment, as we discussed, payment has to be monthly. So what is the option given to them? Here the date has been extended a little. It has been made 25th of the month succeeding such month for the first 2 months. Oh, again, so we need to remember one more aspect, that in a quarter, out of the 3 months in the quarter, for the first 2 months, the date is 25th for making payment. For the third month of the quarter, as we saw earlier, if the dealer is say in list A states, for him the date is 22nd of the month succeeding such month of such quarter, or if it is in list B states, then it is 24th. So for the simplicity, say for a person in Maharashtra, for the first 2 months, date will be 25th for making payment, and for the third month, date will be 22nd. And for making this challan payment, which will happen in PMT 06, the taxpayer will have to select a particular option while making the challan payment, and that will be monthly payment for quarterly taxpayer as the reason for generating the challan. It will be a specific challan payment which will be required. Again, more options, both flexibility. So much flexibility has been given in this scheme. The taxpayer can opt for 2 options provided below for the monthly payment of tax during the first 2 months. It can be either a fixed sum method or the self-assessment method. Now, what is the fixed sum method? In the fixed sum method, a facility has been made available on the portal for generating a pre-filled challan in form GST PMT 06 for an amount equal to 35% of the tax paid in cash in the preceding quarter, where the return was furnished quarterly. So a pre-filled challan will come from the system, will be generated from the system for an amount equal to 35% of the tax paid in cash. Note the word, it is 35% of the tax paid in cash and not the credit utilized. So whatever that person is making a payment through the electronic cash ledger by utilizing his electronic cash ledger, for that the auto-generated challan will come and not for the entire amount of tax payable by that person. Right? Say for example, in the previous quarter, 1 lakh rupees was payable as tax, out of which 80,000 was by way of input tax credit and 20,000 was paid in cash. So 20,000 will be the base amount on which this auto calculation will happen. Right? And I'll come to the example in the subsequent slides. So amount equal to 35% of the tax paid in the cash, that is the earlier option, or amount equal to the tax paid in cash in the last month of the immediately preceding quarter, where the return was furnished monthly. Right? As we saw earlier, we saw there are 2 categories of dealer below 5 crores. One, those who are filing monthly GSTR 1, the others, those who are filing quarterly GSTR. So for quarterly, the amount pre-calculated or pre-generated challan will be for 35%, and balance what comes will be the actual in the third month. But those who are filing monthly, and if they want to opt for the quarterly, then what was paid in the last month before opting in for this scheme, that will be the amount which will be required to be paid. Thereafter, even on continuing basis, whatever was paid in the previous quarter, that will be calculated in the QRMP scheme for the subsequent quarters also. So that is the fixed sum method. We can take an example over here. XYZ, a registered person, has opted for the QRMP scheme for the quarter April to June 21. The manner and the mode of computation of monthly taxes payable are computed as below. So first we take the case where Mr. X was on quarterly basis in the previous period, that is for the quarter ending March 2021. And from April 2021, he wants to opt in for the scheme. And say the tax paid in cash in quarter January to March 2021 was CGST 100, SGST 100, IGST 500, and cess 50 rupees. Then the tax required to be paid in each of the months, April and May, will be CGST 35% of 100, which was paid for the quarter, SGST 35% out of 100, IGST 35% out of the respective amount, and similarly cess. Right? So out of the total tax paid in cash in the previous quarter, 35% will be paid in April, 35% in May, and whatever balance remains, that will be in the third month of the quarter, that is in June. Similarly, if X was under monthly in the previous regime and then is opting in for the QRMP, and say it was 40, 40 and 80 of C, S and I, that same amount needs to be paid in April and May. In the auto-generated challan will be popping out with the same amounts, 40, 40 and 80. Okay, then there is one more condition which is mentioned over here, is that the monthly tax payment through this method, through the fixed sum method, would not be available to those registered persons who have not furnished the return for a complete tax period during such month. Right? Say if he's a dealer who has got duly registered in the previous month, say on 15th of December, the registration is happening, and for January to March, the person wants to opt in for the QRMP scheme, then whatever tax that person would have paid after registration for 15 days, that will not be calculated as a auto-generated amount, and rightly so, because that person was registered only for 15 days and tax has been paid for outward supplies made only for 15 days. Right? So where there's a complete tax period, that only will be considered for this auto-generation of challan, and the complete tax period has also been defined. A complete tax period means a tax period in which the person is registered from the first day of the tax period till the last day of the tax period. So this is a new thing which has come in. Of course, the second method is the self-assessment method. Self-assessment method is the normal, regular method of calculating tax after calculating all liabilities. So we don't want to pay as per the auto-generated challan, because say in a particular month, again we take the same example, say in January to March, say 35,000 was payable in January in cash as per the fixed sum amount, but there could be more purchases in the month of January, and the person does not want to pay under the auto-generated challan but wants to calculate it himself. Yes, he is having that option. He can self-calculate the tax and pay the tax by 25th in form GST PMT 06. One more interesting point is, the said registered person has the option to avail either of the two tax payment method above in any of the 2 months of the quarter. So it may so happen that in the first month, in the same January, the person has opted for the fixed sum method, and in the month of February he wants to opt the self-assessment method. That option is also available. Option ke andar option, so many options are available. I know it becomes more difficult for professionals like us to handle such small. पहले वो लोग परेशान है, वो लोग समझ नहीं रहे हैं क्या हो रहा है. And option के अंदर there are further options. So I don't know whether life for professionals will be get simplified because of this. For the taxpayer, yes, appears to be simplified to a certain extent, but for the professionals, I think more time will get involved in explaining all these method and the options available to the small taxpayers. Okay, there's one more parameter. In case the balance in the electronic cash ledger or the credit ledger is adequate for the tax due for the first month of the quarter, or where there is nil tax liability, the registered person may not deposit any amount for the said month. So, what this condition is mentioning is that there is a auto-generated challan which states that a particular amount is required to be paid. But in case if you're already having that much balance in an electronic cash ledger, you did not deposit that much amount again. But that much amount you can pay by utilizing the credit available in your electronic cash ledger or credit available in the electronic credit ledger. So that is what it is mentioning. Similarly, for the second month of the quarter, if there is balance in the electronic cash ledger or credit ledger, and which is adequate for the cumulative tax due for the first and second month of the quarter, or where there is nil liability, the registered person may not deposit any amount. So it is not that the auto-generated challan you need to deposit in cash only. If there is credit available, you may kindly utilize the same, and still you may still qualify for the fixed sum method also, because you will be paying the amount as per the self-generated challan on the portal, or you will be debiting that much amount from the electronic cash ledger or the electronic credit ledger. Any claim of refund in respect of the amount deposited for the first 2 months of a quarter for payment of tax shall be permitted only after the return in 3B for the said quarter has been furnished. Correct. So in case if any payment is being made or the amount is being deposited into the electronic cash ledger for the first 2 months of by selecting that challan monthly payment for quarterly return, that by filling in that tab, the person cannot take refund of that amount which is deposited qua that PMT06. He can take a refund, but that can happen only after the quarter is over and the return for that quarter has been filed. Till that time, he cannot claim that refund. And this deposit cannot be used by the taxpayer for any other purpose till the filing of return for the quarter. Say, for example, as per PMT06, there was a 10,000 rupees payable, which the dealer has paid 10,000 rupees. That challan payment has been made, but before filing the return, there is a demand, say, from the department. He wants to utilize that electronic cash ledger in clearing of that demand. He will not be able to do that because this cannot be utilized till the return for the particular month has been filed. Only after the return for the particular month is filed, and in case there is an excess amount which remains out of this PMT06 specific challan which is paid, then that can be used for other purposes. Till that time, it cannot be used for other purposes. Of course, the quarterly return will happen on 22nd or 24th day of each month. And all other details which are regularly required as per Form 3B will be made. And the amount deposited by the registered person in the first 2 months shall be debited solely for the purpose of offsetting the liability furnished in that quarter's Form GSTR 3B, right? So, offsetting will happen at the time of filing of 3B. Otherwise, till that time, that offsetting is not. So, offsetting is not required on monthly basis. Offsetting can happen at the time of filing the 3B only. Any amount left after filing of that quarter's 3B may either be claimed as refund or may be used for any other purpose in subsequent quarters. Right? So that amount can either be claimed as refund or adjusted subsequently. Okay, some cases there could be a cancellation of registration. And in case if there is cancellation of registration of such person during any of the first 2 months of the quarter, he is still required to furnish the return in 3B for the relevant tax period. Of course, I think that goes without saying. the 3B will of course have to be filed even in case of cancellation of registration. Okay. So the next question which comes up, that I will give so many options of making the payment, and in case I'm not able to match my total payment which was required to be made for the quarter, will there be any interest liability? So let's see what the provisions are. Okay, so if the registered person is making payment of tax by selecting the option of fixed sum method, that is the auto-generated challan amount, no interest will be payable in case the tax due is paid in the first 2 months of the quarter by way of depositing auto-calculated fixed sum amount. In case such payment of tax by depositing the system calculated amount is not done by due date, interest would be payable at the applicable rate from the due date of furnishing GST payment 6 till the date of making of such payment. So in case if this option is selected but it is not paid, then interest will become payable. Further, in case Form 3B for the quarter is furnished beyond the due date, interest will be payable as per the provisions of Section 50 of the CGST Act for the tax liability net of ITC. Right. So, the only reprieve or benefit which is available over here to the extent is that in case of a fixed sum amount, if that amount is paid by the due date, then there will be no interest even if there is a difference in liability arising in that period. We'll take that with an example in the in this subsequent slide. Okay. So this is the example in case where a GST 3B is filed on due date. The registered person has opted for the scheme and had paid total amount rupees 100 in cash as tax liability in the previous quarter, October to December. So October to December, 100 rupees was paid. The person has opted for a fixed sum method. He pays 35 each on 25th February and 25th March for discharging the tax liability for the first 2 months. At the time of filing the quarterly return, it is found that liability based on the outward and inward supplies for January was rupees 40. He had actually paid 35, but the actual liability came to 40 for the month of January. And for February, that came to 42. Then in that case, no interest would be payable for the lesser amount of tax. That is, he has paid 35. Let's understand. System generated challan se agar payment kiya for the first 2 months. And in case if there is an excess liability coming for that particular month, then no interest is required to be paid for those specific challans. So that is the only advantage if the system, because the system, they feel what the system has generated is correct, that much amount was payable. Okay, we had given him that option. In case if there's a slight variation, then no interest will be charged on the system generated amount, because system ने generate करके दिया, government ने बोला इतना रुपया भरो, हमने भर दिया. So that is where the advantage is. Okay. In case if GST 3B is filed after the due date, say the registered person who has opted for the scheme has paid rupees 100 in cash as liability in the October to December. So in previous quarter it was 100. He opts to pay tax under the fixed sum method. Therefore, he pays rupees 35 each on 25th Feb and 25th March. That is for January and February. 35 rupees are paid under the fixed sum method by the due dates. And the total liability for that quarter, net of available credit, comes to 125. So instead of 100 rupees, the net available credit, the amount to be paid in cash, comes out to 125. And the return is filed late, say on 30th of April, because now the dates have changed. For such persons under QRMP, the due date will be 22nd, right? It is 22nd of April, but he is filing a return on 30th April. So interest will be payable at the applicable rate on rupees 55. It is 125 minus 70, which were deposited in month 1 and month 2 for the period between the due date of quarterly 3B and 30th of April, right? So from 22nd of April, 30th April, for 8 days, interest will be payable on 55 rupees in this case, right? Because the 3B was filed late, and this becomes payable for the third quarter. And the first 2 quarters, he has paid as per the system generated challan, which was given by the system, and hence no differential liability will come for the first 2 months. In case if the entire amount was paid by 22nd April, then again no interest liability would have come at all. But since at the end of the quarter the return is filed late, the interest payable is only for the for the last month due date, that is in this case 22nd April to 30th of April. Okay, what happens in case of a person who is opting for self-assessment method? Interest would be payable as per the provisions of Section 50 of the CGST Act on the net ITC which remains unpaid beyond the due date, and interest, if any, shall be payable through the GSTR 3B. So if you are opting to calculate in by the self-assessment method, by the regular method, then it is your choice. It is you who have decided what is the amount which is required to be paid in cash. In case if there is short or excess in any month of that quarter, then interest will be payable. Okay. Of course, return filings has late fee, and these returns are required to be filed quarterly. So late fee would be applicable in case of the QRMP as is applicable to others, but there is no late fee for the delay in payment of tax in the first one, because that is only a challan payment. That is not a return that we are filing. Even with the challan payment, there is no summary data which is going. It is only the challan specific payment which is going. And IFF, as we discussed earlier, is optional for such taxpayers. So no late fee point on that count also. You may furnish or you may not furnish a IFF, right? So I think that is all about the QRMP scheme. Basically, a scheme to facilitate the small taxpayers, options given to them. And if it is a system-generated challan, it is easier in those cases. But where if the person wants to pay on self-assessment basis, then I think it is as good as remaining with the regular scheme. Such persons may not opt to opt for the QRMP scheme. And if you're not opting for the QRMP scheme, please note that by default you have been migrated, or that particular taxpayer has got migrated. He'll have to opt out of that scheme between 5th of December to 31st of January. Right. So I think that is what we have for the QRMP scheme. I think we should move on to the e-invoice. Atul bhai, we can move on to the e-invoice now. Or do you want to take questions for QRMP now and e-invoice?
Yeah. So if you like to take questions now, Sumit and Kus will ask you there are some questions on this QRMP.
Yeah, I think then let's take up those questions then.
Yes. Yeah, Sumit.
So the first question on QRMP. What if all invoices are uploaded through the IFF facility? So whether we should file nil GSTR1 or what should we do in that case?
Yeah, I think nil GSTR1 will have to be filed.
Okay. The second question from
IFF is only for the first 2 months. Anyway, for the third month, you need to file a normal GSTR1.
Oh, no, just in case there is no invoice in the third month. So invoice in the first 2 months are already filed through IFF and there is no invoice incident in third month. So it will be nil GSTR1 in that case, right?
Nil GSTR1.
Finish it all over again. That's the kind of question.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question from participant Jeel Cheda. What if payment in the first 2 months of the quarter, that is, what is the payment in the first 2 months of the quarter is made after 25th, that is after due date. So will interest be applicable? So I think you have already covered that aspect over here. So I think that would be.
Yeah, so it will be applicable if you are following the self-assessment method. If you are following the system-generated challan, then no interest will be applicable for the first and second month. And provided that for the third month the return is being filed in time. If for the third month return is not being filed in time, then for the third month specific interest as applicable will of course apply.
Okay. I think these were the two queries on QRMP. The next queries on e-invoicing. We'll take that up once we come on the e-invoicing front, sir.
Yeah, fair enough.
Pranav, I had a few queries. Can I ask them?
Yeah.
So what I understood from the entire scheme is, in order to pass the credit, the quarterly dealers will have to ultimately file returns in the form of IFF for the first 2 months. And also make payment on provisional basis. Then why not should they opt for monthly return only instead? Yeah. What is the benefit of this scheme?
So as I told, this benefit will more be available in those cases where there are B2C transactions. So things are much easier for them. For B2C, this will be more applicable and more fruitful for going into this scheme. And secondly, where there are only a few transactions where that GSTR1 or B2B needs to be taken up, there the person may opt for this scheme. Otherwise, it is more helpful to small taxpayers under B2C. For B2B, it's an option again. So for simplicity, in case it is just like GSTR1 is happening as was happening earlier on monthly basis in the form of IFF with only B2B data and not B2C data. Again, IFF will only have that B2B data only. So that with the B2B data, so to that extent, part of the details are getting uploaded. And calculation every month is not required to be made. And it is on the auto-generated challan. And that interest portion, in case that tax amount has been paid as per the auto-generated challan, that interest liability does not come on the small taxpayer if he is opting for that. So basically, each taxpayer or each professional with the respective taxpayer will have to work out what is more beneficial and then either opt in or opt out of this QRMP scheme.
From payment perspective, still there is some payment to be made monthly. Just the leeway is on the filing of GSTR1, even for the B2C members.
Correct.
Okay.
Payment, yeah, because that is what government is not losing out on their monthly revenue.
Correct.
That has to come into their equity, and that is why quarterly return, monthly payment scheme. Monthly payment is monthly.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, now let's move on to e-invoicing. Well, as we all know, e-invoicing means electronic invoicing. The 37 meeting itself, the GST Council had approved e-invoicing, which was to be rolled in from 1st of January 2020.
अभी 2 दिन चल रहा है ना, तो अभी परसों का बोल दो क्या, कल आपका हियरिंग ऐसा करके बोल दो, परसों बोल दो, कल ये वेलिक्स वाले भी आने वाले हैं वैसे, परसों का बोल दो, परसों बोल दो, परसों 12 तारीख बोल दो.
Yeah, we'll continue.
Pranav, I continue.
Yeah, no problem. So this was to be rolled out from 1st of January 2020. So this was already announced. Even we at CTC also had certain webinars, for that new return scheme and this e-invoicing, which was to be coming, and we had seminars on this. But then slowly down the line, on 1st of January, it did not happen. It started on voluntary basis, but it actually didn't get go through. It became mandatory from 1st of October 2020 for specified taxpayers. And from 1st of January, it is becoming applicable to taxpayers with turnover of more than 100 crores. Of course, 1st October, it is for taxpayers more than 500 crores. Recently, there were announcements by the finance secretary, and their plan, what they have mentioned over, is that e-invoicing to be rolled out from 1st April for all B2B transactions. So basically, maybe down the line, that is what the government is thinking, to roll out e-invoicing for all the B2B transactions from 1st of April 2021, and that will replace physical invoices. How far that will be feasible or achievable, well, of course, time will tell. But the way the government is moving and they are trying to implement this e-invoicing, it will not be very far off. Maybe as we see that what was envisaged on 1st of July 2017, the system, it has, most of it has now is, it's coming up GSTR2A, GSTR2B, and rather recently, before I think 1 or 2 days, there was also a news that the communication between the taxpayers, that tab has also got opened up, so that the supplier and recipient can now actually communicate through the GSTN portal, and that is one of the points which was envisaged at the time of implementation of GST, that the recipient will inform the buyer that I have not got the credit of this particular tax invoice, right? So that is what was envisaged when GST was going to get implemented. That is not, it did not happen, but the way things are moving now and they are really speeding up. As I told, it's already 3.5 years almost. And this technology is really shaping up, and we will need to run be along with this technology. I don't think there'll be any option left out to any one of us of not getting used to this new technology. And the way of doing things, the way of compliances under the GST law. I think this is going to be a regular part of our daily lives. Okay, so what are the objectives for implementing e-invoicing? Today, each trader, manufacturer, wholesaler, works contractor, service provider, small dealer, big dealer, everyone has their own system of generating invoices. But these invoices are generated. These invoices are generated by each one of them separately in their own manner, in their own software. Of course, that things will still continue. Of course, as of now, there are parameters of what should be mentioned inside the tax invoice, what should be the ingredients of the tax invoice. We have Rule 46, which says that, okay, these are the particular items which are required to be mentioned in a tax invoice. But for the systems to understand that, there has to be standard procedures so that there is an interoperability of e-invoices across the entire GST ecosystem. And that is the objective of implementing e-invoice. Of course, eliminating data entry again and again is one more objective, that once data for an invoice is getting punched and finalized and the invoice is getting generated, that particular set of data needs to reach across to other systems from which the data can be retrieved. The machines can be able to, or the systems can be able to interpret that data. It's not the entire data of the invoice. These are the particular fields of the invoice which will be available in machine readable format to the system, and the systems will further report them to the further portals, or like the e-way bill portal, the GSTR1, the gst.gov.in, where this data will get pushed out, right? So this is what is the objective of implementing. So there has to be an SOP, there has to be a standard, like we have our accounting standards. There has to be a standard for invoice where the machines, the softwares are able to read that data in a particular format. And that is one purpose of, or the main purpose of having it in a standard format. The generation of the e-invoice, of course, will be the responsibility of the specified taxpayers, who will be required to report the same to the invoice registration portal of GST in form GST INV01. So one more portal, already cbic.gov.in, there is gst.gov.in, there is e-way bill portal, and now we have the invoice registration portal, right? One more portal, one more registration, more passwords for the same person, right? But yes, this is how it is going to be. There is going to be one more portal for the e-invoice, where the specified data of that invoice will have to be pushed into that portal. The IRP in turn, that is the invoice registration portal, IRP, in turn will generate a unique invoice reference number and digitally sign the e-invoice and also generate a QR code. Okay, so once the particular set of data is pushed into the IRP, IRP will generate one more invoice number. Say a dealer is having his own invoice number, say invoice number 101, dated 1st January. The IRP, the invoice registration portal, will also generate one more invoice number, right? That is the invoice reference number, the IRN. It will digitally sign the invoice, e-invoice, and generate a QR code. We are now all aware of QR code. We have been using Paytm and Google Pay, so we all know what is a QR code. Okay, so that QR code will also be generated in that portal. So to whom e-invoicing is applicable? Of course, from 1st October 2020, it is applicable to companies having aggregate turnover exceeding 500 crores. Okay, how to calculate that 500 crores? If the turnover in any preceding financial year from 17-18 is exceeding 500 crores, the company is liable to issue a e-invoice from 1st of October 2020. Right? Which are the transaction types for which e-invoicing will be applicable? So it will be applicable for all B2B transaction, exports, sales to SEZ, and deemed exports. And which are the documents for which e-invoicing will apply? It will apply to the tax invoice, it will apply to the debit note, and it will apply to the credit note. So tax invoice, debit note, and credit note, all these three types of documents, for them e-invoicing will become applicable. Of course, this 1st October date is subject to one-time relaxation. I'll come to that relaxation in the subsequent slide. Okay. And from 1st January 2021, this is becoming applicable to companies having aggregate turnover above 100 crores. Okay, to whom it is not applicable? It is not applicable to specified businesses like a SEZ unit, a insurer, a banking company, a financial institution, NBFC, GTA service, passenger transport service, admission to multiplex for films. For these types of businesses, e-invoicing is not yet made mandatory or not yet made applicable. Okay. So this exemption from to the SEZ unit is applicable only to the SEZ unit and not to the SEZ developer. So here we need to take into consideration that if there's a SEZ developer who is developing the entire SEZ, for that developer, e-invoicing will have to be implemented or executed. But if there's a unit which is inside the SEZ, those are exempted. Then there are certain companies who are having ISD registration numbers, GSTIN. What will happen in those cases? Whether they will be liable to issue an e-invoice? The answer is no. ISDs will not be required to have to follow the e-invoicing, and basically the purpose is to generate the invoice only for the purpose of distribution of the input tax credit of the services which are received by that ISD, and hence for ISD e-invoicing is not required for that ISD unit. Then what happens in the cases where units are situated in the free trade and warehousing zones? Whether they will be exempt from invoicing? The answer is yes, because they are a special category of SEZ. And for units which are situated in FTWZ, they will also not be required to issue e-invoices. As discussed earlier also, this limit of 100 crore or 500 crore is to be considered as per the aggregate turnover definition under section 2 subsection 6 of the CGST Act. We all have been discussing this aggregate turnover all these years, and the same parameter is applicable for e-invoicing also. Just to take a small example, say there's a company with a turnover of 80 crore as per the profit and loss account, with a taxable supply of 20 crore and exempt supply of 60 crore rupees. And there's an interstate stock transfer of 30 crore rupees. So this interstate stock transfer, branch transfer as we call generally, will have to be added to 80 crore rupees. So turnover exceeds 100 crores. And yes, then in that case, e-invoicing becomes applicable to this company. One question which is arising is that whether e-invoice is required for the exempt supplies where bill of supply is issued. Now, when we go to the provisions of the Act, when you go to Rule 46, when you go to Section 31, there is a differentiation between a tax invoice and a bill of supply. A bill of supply is required to be issued where there are exempt supplies which are made by the dealer. All the amendments which have come are with respect to the tax invoices which are issued by a particular person, and they are not with respect to the bill of supply that are issued by a person. So in this case, where there is an exempt supply of 60 crore of rupees, whether the company will be liable to issue e-invoice for those 60 crores of turnover, where they are issuing a bill of supply, say, Well, if you go to the FAQs which are issued by the GST Council, there they mention that e-invoicing is applicable qua the entity, and so whatever turnover is there applicable to that entity, for them, e-invoicing will become applicable. So so as per them, even for this exempt supply, e-invoicing becomes applicable. But I think there's a different view which is possible, which says that when we go to the sections per se threadbare, they all refer to an invoice. The invoice refers to the tax invoice as per section 31, read with rule 46. And wherever we go into the, we try to correlate that it is applicable only in cases where the tax invoices are issued. But say, so technically this e-invoicing should apply only in the case of tax invoices and not in the case where bill of supply are issued. But say in this case, if the person who was required to issue a bill of supply is issuing a tax invoice, then yes, e-invoicing will become applicable to that person. So here a bit of care needs to be taken, and the government is having a different view that it is applicable qua the entity. 2 points again qua this. They have made e-invoicing applicable to all the export transactions also. Maybe the export transactions are linked to the customs portal, and maybe they want to link it with that portal. There could be companies who would be claiming refund qua those exports. So there's a linkage to that. And of course, to all the B2B transactions. Exempt supplies could happen to B2B transactions, but there is no credit which is involved in that. And hence, qua the exempt transactions for wherein bill of supply is issued, it appears that e-invoicing would not be required. But then that more clarity needs to come from the government on this part. Okay, we take one more example. Say there's a company having a turnover of 120 crore as per the P&L, and it has two units, one in the SEZ, another in a DTA. The SEZ unit has a turnover of 80 crore and the DTA unit has 40 crores. So whether e-invoicing will apply to both the units because the turnover has exceeded 100 crore rupees. Well, it will not apply to the SEZ unit because SEZ units are specifically exempted from issuing an e-invoice. But to the DTA unit, although the turnover is 40 crore only, e-invoicing will become applicable to that unit. Whether e-invoicing is applicable for supplies involving reverse charge. If the invoice is issued by a notified person, if the invoice issued by a notified person is in respect of supplies made by him but attracting reverse charge under section 9(3), e-invoicing is applicable. For example, say a taxpayer, say a firm of advocate is having a turnover exceeding 100 crore rupees in the financial year and is supplying services to a company whereby the company will be discharging tax liability as a recipient under reverse charge mechanism. Such invoices have to be reported by the notified person to the IRP. So in this case, the firm of advocates who is having turnover more than 100 crore rupees and supplying services to a company will be discharging liability, where the recipient will be discharging liability, but still the reporting will be required on the invoice registration portal. On the other hand, where the supplies are received by the notified person, say unregistered person attracting reverse charge, as of now, it is applicable in very few cases, or through import of services, e-invoicing doesn't arise. So it is not where the self-invoice is required to be made by the person who is receiving that supplies. They need not generate a e-invoice on the IRP, right? So it is not applicable to the recipient on receipt basis who has received those supplies. It is applicable only to the supplier who is under reverse, whose supplies are liable to tax under section 9(3) and where the recipient is going to pay. There, that person will have to report those transactions. Okay. So whether a person who is liable for issuing a e-invoice, whether he'll be able to check his eligibility for generation of IRN on the portal, yes, he will be able to check, or rather it is freely available on the portal. The person can select e-invoice status of the taxpayer in the search option, And once the GSTIN number is entered, the system will pop out whether that particular GSTIN is enabled for e-invoicing or is not enabled for e-invoicing. This is the link for that portal. e-invoice1.gst.gov.in is the portal wherein this has been enabled. The person can check that. Okay. As far as the e-commerce operators are concerned, e-commerce operators have the option of generating the e-invoice on behalf of the suppliers selling through their e-commerce operator. Okay, generally it is the dealer himself or the supplier himself who is required to generate the invoice on the invoice registration portal. But only in case where transactions are happening through the e-commerce operator. The e-commerce operators, of course, after as per the terms of contract with the supplier, and of course as per the parameters given by the GST Council, they have the option of generating the e-invoice on behalf of their suppliers. Okay, so this is how the checking of the e-invoice enablement happens on the system. The status of the e-invoice enablement of a taxpayer, you can just mention your GSTIN number, enter the CAPTCHA code, and if you are not enabled, the system will say, sorry, you're not enabled for e-invoicing, and only turnover above 500 crores are enabled, right? Okay, this is in the case of a person, and that is how the system prompts for a particular GSTIN number whether e-invoice is enabled for the taxpayer or not. I think this is going to be important once we come to the other parameters of generating of e-invoice versus the regular tax invoice. What will happen in those cases? The transactions between the supplier and the recipient, credit availability. I think with all those parameters we'll discuss. But whether there's an option of checking e-invoice enablement of any person, the answer is yes. The person can check on the system. Okay, so where e-invoice has been enabled, you get this pop-up box. You're enabled for the e-invoicing from 15 December 20 on production. However, you can continue testing on the sandbox on this particular websites, right? So on the trial website, the person can generate an invoice and check. But if you are already enabled, from the system will put you on the production portal part of it, or the production part of it, from 15th of December. This is, I think, done for a company with a turnover of about 100 crores, and this answer is already getting popped up from the system. Okay, there will always be situations wherein a person was required to prepare e-invoice but is not enabled on the portal. If it's not enabled, then he can request for enablement on the portal through the registration e-invoice enablement link. Okay, there could also be situation where there is no requirement for that person to get enabled for e-invoicing, but the portal has calculated based on the 3B data of that person and enabled a particular GSTIN for e-invoicing. There also in the FAQs it has been mentioned that the same may be brought to the notice in this at this email ID support.einv.api.gov.in. So that is also, both the situation can arise. A person may be liable for enablement, a person may not be liable for enablement. Whatever is the position, you need to check your position and take action accordingly. Okay. So what is this e-invoice and its workflow? E-invoice does not mean generation of invoice by any computer system or taxpayer. Basically, the generation of the invoice is going to happen by the taxpayer on its own ERP, accounting or billing software. Now I'm talking of a plain simple scenario wherein as of now there is no integration with the GSTN portal. There's a supplier who is as of now, he has not done anything with regards to e-invoicing. For them, what will be the position? Okay, so generation of invoice by the taxpayer in their own ERP, accounting or billing software, the invoice will be generated. Of course, that will be verified by maker checker system. Then creation of JSON file of the same to upload it on the invoice registration portal in the prescribed format. So as we saw, a normal invoice, a regular invoice, say invoice number 101, which was required to be issued by a taxpayer, that invoice is prepared by him. It is prepared. Okay, it is prepared. Okay, after that, whatever data is required to be uploaded on the portal, that has to be put in a separate Excel file, which will be converted to a JSON file. That JSON file needs to be uploaded on the invoice registration portal. Basically, what are the ingredients which are required to be uploaded as per this GST INV01, wherein this JSON file is required to be uploaded? The basic ingredients like GSTIN of the supplier, GSTIN of the recipient, invoice number, invoice date, taxable amount, tax amount, number of line items, and the HSN number of the highest quantity, whichever is available, the highest value if available. These are the basic requirements which are required to be mentioned on the for uploading on the JSON file through the JSON file. Once that JSON file is uploaded on the invoice registration portal, the IRN will be generated by the invoice registration portal. The IRP will add its digital signature and QR code. Again, a JSON file which will be digitally signed will be returned back by the system to the supplier. That JSON file will have the IRN QR code. Further, the IRP will also share the data received by it with the GST portal and the e-way bill system. So this is the two other portals to which the data will be shared. The data of the invoice will be shared with the GST portal and with the e-way bill system portal. So what the supplier will have to do, the supplier will have to convert the JSON file into a readable format again. QR code is mandatory to be printed on the invoice. Company logo, many companies want to add their logos into the invoice which they are preparing. That logo can be added. Of course, that will be system generated. That logo is not a part of the JSON file which is required to be uploaded for e-invoicing purposes or for generating the IRN purposes. Once the JSON file, after getting the IRN generated, comes back duly signed to the taxpayer, then the taxpayer in their software can convert that JSON file into a readable format, add the logo, and can push on the file to its customers. Whatever additional text, details, terms and conditions which are required to be added onto the invoice, that can be added. Of course, the e-invoice can be generated PDF or printout as may be required and signed by the authorized person. And then that e-invoice will be issued to the customer. And the invoice will be valid only if it has a valid IRN, the invoice reference number, right? So the e-invoice which is required to be issued to the customer will have to contain the invoice reference number and of course the QR code also. This is the process flow. I think we have already gone through this process flow. Okay. Which are the modes of generation of e-invoice? So one was what we discussed right now. So the person is not integrating any of his systems. The systems as they are, they remain as of now. Then he can upload the GST INV01 data onto the portal through the offline bulk upload facilities. So that is through that facility, the data can be uploaded on the portal. The second option is a direct API integration with the taxpayer system. There will be many companies, especially the bigger companies. There will be a direct integration with the taxpayer system. Say a company is having a SAP or Oracle, whatever ERP they are using. Okay, they can directly integrate it with the GST portal directly, so that whatever data is entered in their software, that data gets automatically pushed into the GST system. The GST system will send the IRN, and the IRN will get embedded through the software into the invoice which is prepared, which is required to be prepared. And the final invoice containing the IRN will get issued to the recipient. Okay, so that is one methodology. Okay, everybody would not be able to directly integrate their system with the GST portal. Okay, then there's a second alternative, which is through the ASPs and the GSP. GSPs are the GST Subhidha providers, right? So that integration can happen through the GST. The person can subscribe through this authorized ASPs, GSP. The data will get pushed in through the ASP, GSP to the GST e-invoice portal, and the IRN will come back to the GSP, and through the GSP it will come back to the taxpayer. This could be a cheaper option, but there we are relying in on an authorized service provider uh, through which this technological changes will have to be embedded. But I think that will become necessary, and in major cases where integration with the direct with the system GST portal is not possible, it will happen through the ASPs, GSPs. A web-based or mobile-based mode is also expected in future. That is the still in the making. So in future we can expect that also. This is how the e-invoice would look like. Basically, there's a QR code at the top, and there is the invoice reference number, which is embedded on the invoice, and all other ingredients of the invoice remain as they are. Okay, then there are certain issues which we need to look into. What if the e-invoice is not prepared by the taxpayer? As per Rule 48.5, every invoice issued by a person to whom sub-rule 4 applies in any manner other than the manner specified in the said sub-rule shall not be treated as an invoice. I think that is what has happened. Rule 48.5, which refers to this e-invoicing, it mentions that unless and until the invoice is prepared in the specified manner which is notified, that invoice will not be treated as a invoice. Of course, Rule 46 has also got amended, wherein IRN number, QR code has got added in that rule, and that has become mandatory. And all the consequences of supply without generating the invoice may apply, like penalty under Section 122 or detention under Section 129. Say the goods are moving with a normal invoice but the person was required to issue a e-invoice, and that e-invoice has not been sent along, or the invoice has not been generated at all, then of course the detention under Section 129 can also happen. The regular penalty under Section 122 can also apply. Okay. Was there any relaxation for the companies with turnover above rupees 500 crores when it got implemented on 1st of October 2020? There was a one-time relaxation, a small relaxation, which was provided to such companies. And the relaxation was only for invoices which were required to be issued in the month of October 2020. What had happened there was, they say the invoice was a normal invoice, a regular invoice was dated 5th of October 2020. The relaxation mentioned that the reporting on the IRP can happen up to 30 days from the invoice date, that is up to 4th of November 2020. That reporting was required to be made. So there was no option that reporting will not be required. Reporting was required. Only a concession was given that 30 days time limit from the date of issue of invoice was available. So if the invoice was made on 5th October, by 4th of November, the reporting was required to be made. And that was the only relaxation. So it was only for the invoices issued in the month of October. This relaxation has not been extended for such companies. So as of now, such companies are are not having any further concession, and this e-invoicing has been made fully operational and applicable to the companies above 500 crore turnover. I would like to share one data over here just to mention that already more than 31,000 GSTINs are issuing e-invoices to their customers. 31,000 GSTIN have already started issuing invoices under this new e-invoicing system, and that list is also available on the website. It is there on the e-invoice portal. It is available, right? So it's not going to be a day far off when others or most of the others will get roped into this system. Already we have so many companies who have already started. Of course, they are bigger companies, they have better infrastructure. It is difficult for the smaller companies, but yes, it has become operational. Of course, the QR code having the IRN is to be part of the invoice copy, which is required to be issued to the buyer. The commissioner has power to exempt a person or a class of registered person from e-invoicing for a specified period, say because of, say, there is a cyclone or a flood or something, or any situation, that powers are given that for a particular period, e-invoicing may not, some concession would be given. What concession we need to understand. Maybe that will time only will tell. Okay. One big thing which has come in is that where e-invoicing is applicable, physical copy of invoice need not be carried during the movement of goods. So where the goods are in transit and e-way bill is generated and the e-invoice is generated, the person, even if he's not having the physical invoice, the e-invoice would suffice, and it is sufficient if the QR code having the IRN, invoice reference number, is produced electronically for verification by the proper officer. Right. So even if the QR code is available electronically, that would suffice at the for verification by the proper officer. Okay. We saw that what are the repercussions earlier. What happens to the person who was required to furnish the e-invoice? Now, what could be the scenario where the recipient of the supply? What happens in his case? Say a person was required to issue a normal tax invoice, a regular tax invoice, but he has and he was also required to issue an e-invoice, but the person has issued the regular tax invoice and not the normal, not the e-invoice. In that case, what will happen to that cases? Oh, so again, lots of issues would arise in this case. ITC eligibility as per section 16(2), whether that will be hit, whether the recipient is having the time and the resources to verify the QR code on each of the invoices which have been issued, and matching of the purchase details with the GSTR 2A. So what is going to happen, say, in such cases where the regular tax invoice has been issued, but the e-invoice has not been issued? Because the regular tax invoice will not be a valid tax invoice. Will the ITC eligibility of the recipient be hit? Well, of course, if one of the ingredients of the tax invoice is not mentioned, or there's an error in mentioning that, or say if that ingredient is not mentioned, would the ITC be done away with? Well, that should not be the case. ITC should not be done away with. It should be available to the other person because he's having a normal tax invoice. He has received the goods. He has made the payment. The other person has filed the return. Only thing is the other person has failed to issue the e-invoice or the correct e-invoice, right? So that issues would arise. But what will happen practically? Every time will it be possible to fight with the department and tell, no, I'm having a tax invoice, he has not given an e-invoice, so you should allow me the credit? Matters will go into appeal. How it is going to happen on the system? How it is going to get reflected on the system? Well, when we go through this e-invoicing parameters, whatever e-invoices are going to be generated through the IRN portal, through the IRP, the data is going to get pushed into the first GSTR1 of the supplier, second GSTR2A of the recipient. Moreover, there are going to be specific columns in this GSTR1 and GSTR2A whereby the source of generating the invoice will also be mentioned, and if it is an e-invoice, it will be mentioned specifically in the column in the GSTR1 and in the GSTR2A. So those columns also are becoming a part of our regular GSTR1 and 2A. Right. Of course, this will lead to more matching and identifying the dealers through whom these transactions are happening, whether they are, first of all, liable to issue a e-invoice and they are issuing tax invoice. Because as of now, this is the transition phase. Maybe this transition phase could be for some months or maybe a year or two down the line. Then once all e-invoices are happening, this issue may not happen subsequently. But till the time all the taxpayers are getting uh, enabled under this e-invoice system, this issue will remain. So this is, of course, we all are used to so many reconciliations. एक और reconciliation होने वाला है. Whether the other person was required to issue e-invoice, whether he issued me the e-invoice or not, of course, all those mess is again going to remain and continue. So buyers will have to add this in their checklist as of now, that that the invoice which is coming from the supplier is a valid e-invoice, right? Some buyers are taking confirmation, and this has already started. Buyers are taking confirmation from the suppliers regarding the applicability of e-invoicing, whether they are applicable or not applicable. The buyers are also having the option of verifying applicability of e-invoices of their vendors on the GST portal. And also there is a verify e-invoice app which is available. So through that also the buyers can verify the e-invoice which has been given to them. So all these things are, again, this will have to be slowly gradually embedded into the processes of each of those companies, the supply chain, the purchasers, the accounts, all these departments, and then the taxation department. So this is going to be a task as of now to really match the e-invoices vis-a-vis the regular invoices, and whether the e-invoices which has been issued is a correct e-invoice, and whether that person has properly mentioned it. So more parameters for matching, mismatching will have to be dealt with, in short. Okay. Debit note, credit notes. What happens to the debit notes and credit notes? We all know that there are tax credit notes which are required to be issued as per section 34 of the CGST Act. And there are other credit notes, or which are the financial credit notes, which are also issued by the trade and industry. And there's always lots of confusion in this debit credit notes. So whether e-invoicing is applicable to the debit notes and credit notes, the answer is yes. The debit notes and credit notes being issued under section 34 are covered under e-invoicing. If sales is made now, okay, so now coming to the dates. So once it is made operational, if the sales are made on 10th of September, that is, say, this is a company which is a 500 crore company, and pre-e-invoice implementation of sales is made, and the credit note is issued on 14th October, that is after implementation of e-invoice to that particular taxpayer, then whether such credit note is required to be generated on the invoice registration portal. Because the sales has happened earlier, the credit note is issued subsequently after e-invoicing has been implemented. Then whether such credit note is required to be generated subsequently, the answer is yes. So even if sales has been made pre-implementation of e-invoicing, and if the credit note is issued post-implementation of e-invoicing, the person will have to mention will have to generate the e-credit note, and he will have to mention the IRN on the credit note. Yeah, so next question, whether IRN is to be mentioned on the debit note, credit note, the answer is yes, IRN will have to be mentioned. Whether QR code will be required on the DNCN, again the answer is yes. In case of the debit credit notes, is there any validation with respect to the invoice number in respect of e-invoice? So we all know that while filing GSTR1, earlier there was a validation qua the invoice number vis-a-vis the debit note or credit note which was being issued. Thereafter, amendments were made in the section itself, amendments were made on the portal itself, and now that linkage has been discontinued qua the debit note, credit note, and qua the invoice number in that GSTR1. So whether that validation will be required for the invoice for the e-credit note and debit note? No, there is no such validation with respect to the invoice reference number. So at least we are saved of that hassle of linking the debit credit note, e-debit note, credit note with the invoice. So that is not a mandatory validation. Is e-invoice compulsory when supply is made to receiver whose turnover is more than 500 crore or 100 crore? Yeah, because this condition is qua the supplier. It is not qua the recipient. The supplier could be the recipient could be a small company. The recipient could be a bigger company. For but the requirement is only qua the supplier and not qua the recipient. Which are the official websites for generation of e-invoice? These are the official websites, out of which www.einvoice1.gst.gov.in is only active. It goes up to e-invoice 10. So there will be 10 portals for this invoice registration. As of now, only e-invoice 1 has become active. What is the IRN? We have been talking about the IRN. What is this IRN? IRN is of 64 characters length. So there will be 64 alphabets in this, or alphanumeric. This IRN is a unique number in the GST system, irrespective of the taxpayer, financial year, and document type. And basically, IRN is the hash of supplier's GST IN, the financial year, the document type, that is whether it's an invoice, debit note, or credit note, and the document number, that is document number of that particular invoice. And this is how the IRN is going to look like. It is this particular 64 digit 64 character hash which will be generated. Practically impossible to copy and type it, see and type it. It will be a copy paste function, or it has to happen through the system. Anybody who will try to type this 64 characters, there is bound to be error. Already there are so many mismatches. If there are more mismatches with this IRN, life will be more miserable. So basically, it is all required to be happening through system or through technology. And what data is embedded in the QR code? Yes, this is the entire data which is required to be uploaded on the portal, and all that data will be embedded in the QR code. We discussed earlier that the GSTN of the supplier, GSTN of recipient, invoice number of the supplier, date of generation of the invoice, that's the normal invoice number and the normal invoice date, the invoice value, which is the taxable value and gross tax, the number of line items. Say there are 3 line items in an invoice, the number of line items are 3 that will be depicted or reflected. HSN code of the main item, that is the line item having the highest taxable value, that needs to be mentioned in that data which is going to get uploaded on the portal. And once that data is generated, all this data will be uploaded, the unique IRN will be generated, and this unique IRN will get embedded in the QR code, right? So all this data will get uploaded with the IRN to get the QR code. And I missed out, the IRN generation date will also get embedded into it, right? Okay. Now we have been discussing about the QR code. I also wanted to highlight one more point, which was regarding the dynamic QR code. And what is that? Now this dynamic QR code is applicable again to companies with aggregate turnover more than 500 crores. And they are required to include in their invoice, or rather in their B2C invoice, a dynamic QR code. So what is a dynamic QR code? Dynamic QR code is a code which is made available to the buyer through a digital display with payment cross-reference and shall be deemed to be having the QR code. So basically, what all ingredients a normal QR code has, the dynamic QR code will have the cross-payment reference. That is the bank details through which payment can be made through digital modes. That will be get embedded into the dynamic QR code. Okay, so to whom this is applicable, this QR code? It is applicable only to companies having turnover. Dynamic QR code is applicable to companies having turnover more than 500 crores. From when it is applicable? It was to be implemented from 1st of October 2020 along with this e-invoicing. But the e-invoicing has been postponed to 1st of December 2020. So as of now, dynamic QR code has become mandatory for B2C invoices being issued by companies having turnover more than 500 crores. Here, it has not been made applicable to companies having turnover more than 100 crores. So that is different. So there are two differences. As far as the dynamic QR code is concerned, it is applicable for companies with turnover above 500 crores only as of now. It is not applicable to the 100 crore slab. Second, it is applicable only for B2C invoicing. It is not applicable to B2B invoicing. It has no relevance to the B2B, because for B2B you have a normal QR code. For B2C, it is the dynamic QR code. Okay. So whether this has got implemented from 1st of December, the answer is yes. Dynamic QR code has got implemented. It was to implement it from 1st of December 2020. A notification came on 29th November, just 2 days before the date of implementation, mentioning that if the registered taxpayer complies with this provision with effect from 1/4/2021 for the period December to March 21, then no penalty will be levied under section 125 on such dealers. So basically what the government has done, government as of now for this dynamic QR code, it has implemented it. It is operational. It is required to be done. Okay, there is no penalty as of now for the first 4 months. But it has not extended the due date. It has told the companies you need to get into this culture of invoicing, issuing in B2C invoices with dynamic QR code. So it means it is not the case where, say, a company having turnover above 500 crores, even if it sells goods worth rupees 500, in that case, that invoice needs to have a dynamic QR code where it is a B2C transaction. So it is not it is only applicable for huge transactions. Huge transactions, there will be no cash movement. There are other laws applicable. There is income tax applicable. Okay. So once, say, it's a retail counter, say it is a shopper stop or a big bazaar or something like that, where the turnover will be more than 500 crores. But any transactions which they are enter into from 1st of December 2020, for which cash payment is being made, there the dynamic QR code has become mandatory for them. So only saving grace is for the first 4 months if the provisions are applied from 1st April 21. Okay. How many copies of e-invoice are required to be generated? If we see the normal provisions, there were the provisions of preparing invoices in triplicate for goods and invoices in duplicate in case of services. But as far as e-invoicing is concerned, these both rules have been done away with, and there is a proviso, or rather there is a rule 48.6 which provides that the provisions of subrule 1 and 2 shall not apply to invoice prepared under the manner specified in subrule 4, that is to the e-invoice. So wherever an e-invoice is required to be prepared, there that original, duplicate, triplicate, those parts will not be required to be prepared. What time the e-invoice will be generated? So as practically there is no change in the timing of generation of e-invoice. It is as applicable under section 31 itself. The time of supply has not changed. The time of supply remains the same. So, or rather, e-invoice is a process which is required to be done prior to issuing the normal invoice. So normal invoice can be prepared, e-invoice to be generated. It is one of the ingredient of the tax invoice. Itna samajh lena hai. So it is nothing like that. Any new time of supply rules apply to e-invoice. IRN is an ingredient of the tax invoice or the e-invoice which is required to be issued by the registered taxpayer. So the basic time of supply rules will apply. So one more question which comes up, that will businesses be required to generate e-invoice on the GST portal itself? No, I think we already discussed earlier that they can integrate it through their ERP system, or they can also have it in their own system. We were speaking to one company and they are having turnover, say, more than 100 crores, but only 3-4 invoices are issued in 1 month. Okay, for them integration is not required for such companies. They can continue having a normal e-invoice, a normal invoice, generate the IRN and then issue the invoices. So it all depends on what is the quantum of the transactions that a company is dealing into. And that basis, it will be done, but the e-invoice is not required to be generated on the portal itself. That option is available, provided you are able to integrate that into your system. Whether there are separate invoice formats for traders, professionals, and contractors, no, the format also remains the same. The schema, which we saw earlier, those 7 ingredients of GSTN of supplier, GSTN of recipient, date, invoice number, etc. All those schema remains the same. There is no change in any invoice formats to be issued by any other person. Again, let's understand the only basic purpose is to generate the IRN and put it into the e-invoice. Mention it in the invoice which is required to be issued. Of course, when we come into the schema of the e-invoice, there are mandatory and non-mandatory fields. And non-mandatory field is for the business to choose. So if a person feels that, okay, he wants to mention certain more data on the invoice which is going to get generated on the invoice registration portal itself. So there are a few items and which he feels, I don't want to prepare 2 invoices. I will prepare the system generated invoice. Okay, the government has given the option of adding certain data fields into the e-invoice apart from those 7 mandatory data fields. So you may choose whichever option or format you want to choose. You may add those details into the IRN, into the JSON file, which will get uploaded into the system. And the system generated invoice, if it contains all the details that the taxpayer needs to inform to its recipient, then yes, the e-invoice can have those fields. But those are non-mandatory fields. There are only few fields which are required for generating the IRN. So the person will have to actually cater or check the applicability of what it wants to do for the invoice it wants to generate. And if we see the parameters which are mentioned in the non-mandatory fields of the schema for generating e-invoice, it covers almost all the business needs. And only the specific sectors, they need to choose which mandatory field are needed by them or their ecosystem. So whatever they feel is required, the systems or the portal has that options. So basically, I think a self-check will have to be required to be done by the IT team of that company. What all ingredients are required to be mentioned on the e-invoice, and those can be mentioned. Regarding the logo, I think it is a very common feature of putting the logo on the e-invoice. Logo is not a part of the e-invoice schema, which is made available by the government. So in case, so say in a case where there are mandatory and non-mandatory fields, and a taxpayer chooses to fill the non-mandatory fields also, कि भाई थोड़े item है मैं मेरा e-invoice portal पे ही generate कर लेता हूँ, ठीक है? But there is a restriction: the logo cannot be uploaded on the IRP. And if that person wants to mention his logo, he'll have to generate the JSON file, integrate that JSON file with his normal billing software, and then put his logo over there. So that is one distinction which will have to be made as far as the logo is concerned. It cannot be a part of the JSON file to be uploaded on the portal. Invoices have to be uploaded on the IRP one at a time. You cannot upload all the invoices at a time. Although there's a bulk generation facility available for the taxpayers, but the systems will have to be designed in such a way that it makes requests one by one for the user. It will not make a difference, but the system will have to be generated accordingly. IRP is only a pass-through validation portal. Certain key fields are validated on the IRP. The government mentions that the IRN is expected to be generated in sub 200 millisecond duration. Not even a second. Not even a millisecond. Sub 200 millisecond duration, they are expecting that the IRN will be generated. And that is what the government is telling. Like 150,000 returns can be filed at a time on the portal, or 3 lakh returns can be filed on the. So here it is sub 200 millisecond duration is the time expectation which the government is mentioning to generate the IRN. Let's hope it really runs so fast, and especially when everybody is on the portal generating their invoices. Okay, So regarding the e-invoice bulk generation tool, that tool is available in 4 formats. Format A is a simple format where all the invoice details can be entered in one sheet. So whatever invoice details the person wants to enter, here we are talking of in this format all the mandatory fields as well as the non-mandatory. So if a person wants to enter the non-mandatory fields, then he can enter it in one sheet in format A. Then there's a format B, wherein the main invoice details can be entered in one sheet and item details can be entered in a separate sheets. See, the person might be wanting to have various line items. There could be a BOQ against which the invoices are being generated. And there are, say, 100 line items, or say there are 50 line items in a particular, even if there are 10 line items in a particular invoice, how it is to be done. So then there is an option that a separate sheet is there and data can be entered in that separate sheet. So whatever copy paste is required to be made through another system and put into this format, they can put it into this format. This is in a bulk uploading. Then there's a format C also, which is a more detailed type of a format where apart from the invoice details, item details, there can be payment details, reference details, and any other details which the taxpayer wants to mention and which can be entered in a separate sheet. So that format is also available. So first, a very simple format, a format with item details, a format with payment details, reference details. Then again, one more format, format D, which is again a very detailed format, which of course covers whatever is there in the earlier formats. And all this can be entered in one sheet itself, but that sheet will be too long a sheet. It will be having various columns, not very easy to manage all the details. But yes, nowadays people are getting used to this Excel sheets and how to play with these Excel sheets. So if they want to opt for that, they have the option. So these are all the options available. The person will have to select which option he wants to opt into to generate the e-invoice. Registration for e-invoice, I think it's a normal routine procedure. I did not say much. Only thing I would like to mention is that the same user ID and password of e-way bill portal can be used for the e-invoice portal. I think that is some saving grace in the sense that at least some lesser part of user ID and password will have to be managed and maintained by the taxpayers and their tax professionals, right? So the same user ID and password of e-way bill can be used on this. And if you're not registered on the e-way bill, then whatever registration procedures are there, this is the portal, how it looks. There's the registration. Of course, this is all the general data. This is just to see you on the screen. I need not go into all these details. And there's a login. Yes, then there's a dashboard. The dashboard contains the details of the invoices generated and the invoices cancelled. I'll also come to the cancelled invoices part of it. Atul bhai?
Pranav bhai. Yes, Pranav bhai.
I think we have reached our time limit of 7. Can we continue for 5-10 minutes more?
Yeah, you can continue. Yes.
Okay. So, so on this portal, this is the dashboard, how it is going to look, and whatever invoices, e-invoices are generated on the portal, that will be available, and whatever are cancelled, that will be available. The e-invoice tab will have the options of generate new invoice, bulk upload, cancel an invoice, print an invoice, or bulk IRN cancel. These options will be available. This is how, through the taxpayer search, the person can identify the GSTIN number. These are, I think, normal features. Okay, then there is a QR code verify app which is available. So you can log into the system. And this will be very, very useful to taxpayers and tax professionals across the country. This QR code verify app. I myself have downloaded this app on my mobile. We have to enter a mobile number and OTP. You will get a link to the app which is to be downloaded. Download that app. Try to scan invoice. I think we have moved to the next slide. You can scan the QR code and through the QR code you will be able to see the basic ingredients of the schema details which we mentioned earlier. That those 7 ingredients along with the IRN number and the IRN date. We are able to see it on our mobile itself that whether it is a valid e-invoice which is generated on the portal. Okay, how can one verify the authenticity of the correctness? Yeah, so there are two options. One is what we discussed is the QR code verify app. You can download the app by first registering on the portal, getting the link, and then verify. And second is if the supplier of the invoice sends the JSON file to the recipient of the recipient of the invoice will also be able to verify that through the portal by uploading the JSON file. So this may happen, this may not happen in cases, but in case a person wants to verify, that is, there is one more option which is given by the government through which the JSON file can be uploaded onto the portal. Upload the JSON file, and from that the code can be verified. The e-invoice can be verified. Okay, what will be the impact on the GST returns vis-a-vis this e-invoicing? Well, the benefits, we can see that the various tables of GSTR1 of the supplier will get auto-populated. Right, so this basic details will get auto-populated in the GSTR1. Second, the IRP will push the e-invoice data into the GSTR2A of the recipient. There also this data will get reflected into the 2A of the recipient. So both of them, so GSTR1 and GSTR2A, at both places the option will be available. What are the challenges? Reconciliations will increase. वैसे भी अभी reconciliations, we are doing so many types of reconciliations. So whether the e-invoice or a regular invoice, that two tabs, because there are still, this being a transition phase, there are still companies who are under the regular tax invoice system and some companies who are under the e-invoicing system, right? So this regular invoices versus the e-invoices, that matching is going to increase. Then e-invoices, of course, the first we have seen, e-invoices normal invoices received vis-a-vis GSTR2A, so as happens for GSTR1, for GSTR2A also that needs to be checked. E-invoices vis-a-vis the IRN generated. Okay, so that is again going to be a new challenge which is going to come up. IRN is generated, but the invoice is not issued to the customer. What will happen? So whether whatever IRNs have got generated, they have the final bills have been issued or not issued, or whether that IRN was generated and subsequently the order got cancelled and hence the final invoice was not issued. So there can be a scenario like that. So that tab of the list of IRNs generated versus the actual invoices issued, that mapping will be one more parameter which will require to be checked. E-invoices vis-a-vis the e-way bill, right? So again, similar position. E-invoices generated, IRN number has come, order gets cancelled, e-way bill had got generated in the meantime, and finally the invoice was not issued. Or maybe the IRN is issued, but the e-way bill is not issued. It can be either or. Either of these 2 or 3 situations can arise. So again, a mapping of that data will be required. It will again, it will add to the list of challenges that we are already facing either as taxpayers or as tax professionals. Okay. Manas matra bhulne patra. So it is a saying that, you know, it's man who makes mistake. So there are bound to be mistakes in generating e-invoices also. So what will happen in those cases? Whether e-invoices generated through GST system can be partially or fully cancelled. It cannot be partially cancelled, it has to be fully cancelled. The e-invoice mechanism has enabled the the cancellation option. We also saw it in that dashboard screenshot which we saw earlier. This cancellation will have to be reported within 24 hours. Oh, one more challenge. पता ही नहीं चलता है कभी इनवॉइस इश्यू हो गया, करेक्ट इनवॉइस है, आईआरएन कभी जनरेट हो गया, बट अगर कैंसिल करना है तो विद इन 24 आवर्स ओनली द कैंसलेशन हैज टू हैपन. सो अगेन वन मोर चैलेंज टू बी कंसीडर्ड. Any cancellation after 24 hours could not be possible on IRP rather. However, one can manually cancel the same on the GST portal before filing the returns. So let's take an example. The e-invoice has got generated. The IRN has also got generated, but the order has got cancelled. Or rather, there is a amendment in that invoice amount which is going to be generated. The amendments are also going to be an issue. But if the invoice needs to be cancelled, it can be cancelled through the GSTR1 only. That column will be available in GSTR1, and there you can go and cancel that e-invoice which is generated manually, e-invoice which is generated through the IRP. But if the connected e-way bill is active or verified by the officer during transit, the cancellation of the IRN will not be possible. That is within that 24 hours. IRN is generated the moment of the goods had started. The proper officer has verified that on the system, or the e-way bill is active. Say the e-way bill is active, then that IRN will not get cancelled, because it cannot happen that IRN generate किया material ऐसे ही भेज दिया. That cannot just happen, right? So that also linkage is there. And in case of cancellation of IRN, GSTR1 will be updated with such cancel status. So that cancel status will also be available on the GSTR1. Amendments to the e-invoice are allowed on the GSTR portal as per the provisions of the GST law. Right. So it can be done only through the GSTR1. So in case if any amendment is required to be made of a IRN which has got generated, it can happen only through the e-invoice through the GSTR1. Otherwise, it cannot be made. Amendment is not possible through the IRP. So I think these were some of the points which I thought were necessary for all of us to understand this new concept of e-invoicing. Of course, apart from the benefits, there are going to be many challenges, especially when this transition phase is happening and this implementation of e-invoicing is happening. There are going to be challenges with regards to the matching of the data and so many new challenges. But yes, we professionals are equipped to face these challenges. And at CTC, we all come together, we learn together, and let's hope we all are able to equip ourselves to meet these challenges and overcome all the difficulties which may arise or which may technically arise in this e-invoicing era. I am really thankful to the entire team at CTC, Atul bhai, Rajiv bhai, Naresh bhai, Sumit, Keval, Kush, and Hemang for giving me this opportunity for presenting my views on this new topic, learning myself and sharing my views with all of you. And I hope this will be very useful to you. In case if there are any questions, we can take them up. And again, thank you very much, all of you, for a very patient hearing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pranav bhai. There are some questions. Let's take it for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
next 5 minutes. Yeah, Kush.
Pranav bhai, one of the participant is asking, can we generate backdated e-invoice?
No,
Okay.
it is system generated, so I don't think any backdated emails. It will happen on the date when. So you have to ensure that the IRN number which will be generated through the e-invoice is a part and parcel of your normal tax invoice. Your normal tax invoice cannot be issued without the IRN. So it is a prerequisite for issuing an invoice. It cannot be backdated.
Okay. E-invoice required to generate B2C transactions? The answer is no, that you have covered.
Yeah.
So this creating of a profile on the invoice website, is it mandatory if we engage with the API, ASP or GSP? Still, do we need to create the profile?
No, anyways, if you are going to integrate with the ASP, GSP, some basic registration will definitely be required, the profile creation. But as I told earlier, if already say the person is registered on the e-way bill portal, then no profile creation will be required again. The same user ID and password you can directly use on the e-invoice portal and start generating e-invoices. But in case if you are a service provider who was not having any e-way bill facility, then yes, you will have to register, even if it is through a ASP, GSP. I think that registration will be required.
Oh. One last question. One person is asking, if by mistake instead of B2B invoice, I have inadvertently prepared B2C invoice. And now after a few days or after a few months, it has come to light that actually the customer has communicated the GST and now. So how does he amend that B2C to B2B invoice and in the e-invoice system?
Right. So I think the invoice which had already got generated. So I think what would happen in such cases. So since it was B2C transaction which was initially carried on, right?
Yes,
So the person is saying that he has generated a normal invoice as a B2C invoice, so he would have not have generated the IRN number itself.
correct.
So all the provisions of normal, the regular practice of from canceling that B2C and going into that B2B transaction, whatever we are following as on today, that would apply.
Okay.